So I'm going to get in trouble this morning from even using this idea. I'm going to talk about race. I'm going to talk about racism. You turn on the television and you cannot escape it. You turn on the news, and regardless of what station you listen to or watch or what news anchor you're hearing from, you cannot escape this constant battle of racism. And let's be clear, this idea, this understanding, this reality is that racism is not just a black and white thing. It's not just a skin color versus skin color thing. It is any time, it is anything, it is anyone that is different than us. Anybody that's from a different nation, anybody that's from a different ethnicity, anybody that's from a different culture, anybody that has a different color of pigment of melanin in their skin. It's race. It's the issue. And when I watch the television, I don't think I'm a racist. I wasn't raised that way. I don't really feel like I see in color, when it comes to dealing with people. But man, when I watch the television, holy cow, they sure are trying to convince me I am or I'm not. They're sure trying to convince everybody else that they should be or should not be. It sure seems like they're trying to draw battle lines between all the different types of people we have on this glorious planet we call Earth. It sure seems like our culture is trying to drive a wedge between every single person that's different from anybody else. Wow. It's such a violent discussion in our culture today. It's politicized. It's totally drives our culture and everything that we talk about, especially when it comes to politics, when it comes to love, grace, economics, every single aspect. It has been a wedge in our culture. So I ask you the question, are you racist? Weird to even be talking about, right? Well, no, I'm not. But then you ask the question, well, are there certain types of people I don't associate with as much? Are there certain types of people that I say negative things about? Are there certain types of people that I think are different than me? That live a different life than me, that make different decisions than me, and then I look down upon those things. And are we? Well, let's just say we're not. But then let's ask the question in a different frame of mind. What if God behaves the same way that we do with different types of people? So what if God were to crawl in my head and look at the types of people that we're talking about, whatever they are, whether it's skin color, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's whatever, whatever makes them different. What if God looks at those people the same way I do? Would he still be God? What if God is racist? Wow, that would totally change the dynamic of the cross, right? Like that would totally change what Jesus came for. That would totally change what the cross stands for. That would totally change what Jesus' blood was shed for. What if God was racist? And again, I'm not talking black and white. I'm not talking skin color necessarily all by itself. I'm talking ethnicity. I'm talking socioeconomic boundaries. I'm talking anything that makes somebody different. That's a different race, different cultures, different countries, borders. What if God looked at people the same way we do? Ooh. Man, it sure changes things, doesn't it? That's why I love Acts chapter 10. Because the reality is that when the Old Testament was written, God did something really interesting. He spoke to one race. The Old Testament is written to and for one race. The Hebrew people, the Jews. Like God wrote that Old Testament to them, about them, for them. He selected this group of people and he said, you are my chosen. He went to Abraham and he said, listen, everybody that comes from you is mine. Everybody else you need to stay away from. God said that. That's what the Old Testament's all about. He said, I have a chosen group of people. And it's the Jewish people. He said that over and over and over. And he even tells the Jewish people, don't associate with anybody that's not you. Ooh, that sounds rough. But even in the Old Testament, as you read it and read it and read it, you come through all of these prophecies. You get through all of these big books that are tough to read through. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all of those. You find promise after promise after promise after promise. Hint after hint after hint after hint. Prophecy after prophecy after prophecy. To the Jews, where God says, hey, it's not always going to be just about you. It's not always going to be just for you. It's not always going to be just to you. He says there's going to be a day where something happens, where someone comes, Jesus, that is going to change the landscape of everything we call normal, that is going to invite every single person into my family. Like there's hint after hint after hint through all of the first 2/3 of our Bible about that day. And we finally get to read about it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John when Jesus comes and we find out what the life of Jesus is all about. We find out what his message is all about. He says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. And then we read this crazy verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son so that whomever believes in him will have everlasting life. Like things start to change. Like imagine if you're a Jew where you think that, oh wait, all this is about me. And all of a sudden Jesus, the Messiah, says something like, anybody who believes in me gets to go to heaven. Oh wait, that's different. That's a paradigm shifter. That's a spiritual earthquake. And so we get to this book of Acts where we start to see the first church, where we start to see what this Christianity thing looks like. We start to see what the way is. I totally agree with Nathaniel. If we ever named our church something else, it'd be the way. It's because it's cool. Because it is exactly what the church is. It is the way to heaven. Because church is a body of people who believe that Jesus is the Lord of their life. And when that happens, it is the way. And we find out through the book of Acts that we will see that the way is for everyone. We got to see a glimpse of it when we talked about the Ethiopian, when he was brought into Christianity, this guy from Africa. He would have been a dark-skinned black man brought into the fold. And some people would say, well, he was maybe, he was going to the temple, so maybe that's kind of a Jewish thing, so maybe he's not a Gentile. I don't know, that's an argument, whatever. But we all agree for sure that Acts chapter 10 is the example of the first bringing in of the world to God's reality of salvation and grace. And so when we read this text today, Acts chapter 10, there is absolutely no misunderstanding that this message, that the way is for everyone. Let's read it. So first off, just kind of catching up on the story here. Acts chapter 10, the first few verses here, we meet a guy named Cornelius. We know he's a soldier in the Roman army. We assume that he's probably a centurion, that he is a leader of the Roman army, that he has many men underneath him, that he leads them. Now, the interesting thing about him, if he's a centurion, that we know that he worked his way up to that position. He's not some guy who skipped out on all the hard stuff, just went to officer school and jumped in as a butter bar. That is not him. He didn't jump in and miss all of that stuff. He worked his way up through. He fought with men. He joined the army. He earned that position to lead these men. He would be a well-paid man, a well-respected man, a man of honor. He would have a lot of clout, and a lot of people would look up to him. He was respected. He would have had a big household in the sense that he probably would have had a lot of servants, a lot of people that lived with him, a lot of attendants. He would have had a lot of people with him all the time. And we know that about Cornelius, and he was a Roman. He was a Roman. He was not a Jew. He was not a Hebrew by blood or belief. He was a different race from any Jew or any Hebrew. He was a Roman. He did not believe in Jewish thought. He did not practice Jewish belief. He did not practice Jewish dietary code. He was a Gentile. He was the world, as the word describes it. He was anything that was not a Jew. He is the epitome of an enemy to the Jews. That's who this guy Cornelius is. Yet we see he has an interesting event. So in Caesarea, there lived a Roman army officer, his name Cornelius, who was a captain of the Italian regiment. He was a devout, God-fearing man. He was a devout, God-fearing man, as was everyone in his household. He gave generously to the poor and prayed regularly to God. One afternoon about 3 o'clock, he had a vision in which he saw an angel of God coming toward him. Cornelius, the angel said. So regardless of what race this guy is, regardless of where he's from or what citizen of whatever country, regardless of those details, what is important to understand is this: he believed in God. Now think about that. God was for the Jews up to this point. Like he wouldn't have been allowed in the temple. He wouldn't have been allowed to go into the synagogue. He wouldn't have been allowed to participate in any of those worship services. He would not have been allowed to go in there. And yet he still had faith enough that he gave regularly. It's a big deal. He prayed regularly. He worshiped the Father. He was a God-fearing man, and everybody in his household was as well. So that says something about his evangelism. That says something about his lifestyle, that it represented something that they wanted to follow. Yet he wasn't a Jew. This is what happened. So Cornelius stared at him. This is the angel in his vision. Cornelius stared at him in terror. "What is it, sir?" he asked the angel. And the angel replied, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have been received by God as an offering. Now send some men to Joppa and summon a man named Simon Peter. He is staying with Simon, a tanner, who lives near the seashore." As soon as the angel was gone, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier, one of his personal attendants, one of his best. He told them what had happened, and he sent them off to Joppa. So something is going on here with Cornelius. He gets this message, and he is told by an angel of God, "You've got to get this guy Peter, and you've got to hear what he has to say." There is something special about the message that this guy named Peter is going to tell you. And like what Cornelius probably doesn't understand is this, is that the message that Peter is going to give him is the gospel, is the way. It is the truth. It is the life. And this message has never been for anybody but Jews up to this point. That at the entrance of Jesus, with the John 3:16 moment, it is at this moment that the world is invited into this. And so something is going on with Peter, like at the same time but separately. While Cornelius is having this moment with an angel, Peter is over here somewhere else, and he has this vision. As the story goes, he has this vision. He's called up to the roof, and he has this strange dream. Just read it with me. "The next day, as Cornelius' messengers were nearing the town, Peter went up on the flat roof to pray. It was about noon, and he was hungry. But while a meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the sky open, and something like a large sheet was let down by its 4 corners. In the sheet were all sorts of animals, reptiles, and birds. Then a voice said to him, 'Get up, Peter. Kill and eat.' Get up, Peter. Kill and eat." And Peter says this because the animals he's seeing in this are not animals that he's allowed to eat as a Jew. They go completely against the dietary code. It's not something he's allowed to eat. Everything in Leviticus says, "Don't eat that, Peter. If you eat that, you'll be unclean. If you eat that, Peter, you won't be a good Jew. If you eat that, Peter, you won't be following your faith. If you eat that, Peter, you're a bad guy." That's everything that Peter knows. And now he has this vision from God that says, "Go ahead and eat it." Peter's response is, "No, Lord," Peter declared, "I have never eaten anything that our Jewish laws have declared impure and unclean." Never one time has Peter eaten something that was in that list. Never once. Verse 15 says this, "But the voice spoke again. Do not call something unclean if God has made it clean." The same vision was repeated 3 times. Then the sheet was suddenly pulled up into heaven. Now there's a little detail in that verse that I think that I missed a lot. The vision came to Peter not once, not twice. It had to take 3 times. Have I ever told you that I'm a lot like Peter? Peter was so stuck on this tradition, this law, that he was missing the freedom that God was giving him. God was telling Peter, hey, don't worry about that. Like, I know that that's what the law says. I know what that's all about. But when, my son Jesus, when he came, like your best friend, the one that wants you to go feed the lambs, when he came, he did away with all that. He didn't do away with it. He fulfilled it. He said that that's not what's important anymore. He says it's all about the heart. It's about a Savior. It's about a perfect sacrifice. It's not about eating what's right or what's wrong. It's about having a Savior that covers all of that. That's what God had to tell Peter, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it was in this moment where God does an amazing thing. That he is giving this message to Peter that, hey, it's okay to eat these things that you have always thought are unclean. It's okay to eat like a Gentile. It's okay to eat like the world. It's okay to eat what non-Jews eat. What every other race does, it's okay because I've said it's clean now. That is earth-shaking, spiritual earthquake. That's never been allowed before. That's never happened before. That's what sets this apart from the experience with the Ethiopian a couple chapters ago. Like this is a paradigm-shifting reality in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of the church. So in the moment where Peter's having this vision, there are Gentiles on their way to Peter, where he's staying, to go get him. So God's doing this crazy thing, like he's having this vision with Cornelius, he's having this vision with Peter. It's all working out at the perfect time so that when this vision is done, the Gentiles show up to Peter and they say, hey, come with us. So we skip down to verse 24, and they've been on this journey now. They arrive, they go back. Peter says, okay, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. The Gentiles say, come with us. We're going to take you somewhere to meet a guy. Kind of ironic that he just gets done having a vision about things that are unclean are now clean, as Gentiles who would be unclean ask him to come with him to a Gentile's house. Verse 24, though, they arrived in Caesarea the following day. Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter entered his home, that's a no-no. Jews could not do that. The Old Testament, Leviticus, is clear about that. You cannot do that. Jews cannot go into a non-Jew's home. It's a Gentile thing. It's a world thing. You cannot. It's an unclean thing. You cannot do that. Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and friends as Peter entered his home. Cornelius fell at his feet and he worshiped him. But Peter pulled him up. He said, stand up. I'm a human being just like you. So they talked together and went inside where many others were assembled. Look what Peter says here. Verse 28. Peter told them, you know it is against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home. You know it's against Jewish law for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home. Like he tells the Gentile man this right now. Like imagine that conversation. Like, hey, it's illegal for me to enter into your house because you're different than me. Imagine saying that to a human being. Like you walk up onto somebody's porch, you knock on their door, and they come to the door, and then you realize they're a different race than you, and you say, never mind, I can't go in your home because of what you look like. Imagine saying that out loud. Yet Peter does. Because what is about to follow that is one of the most theologically significant texts that we can read. You know it is against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home like this or to associate with you. What a stab in the face. Come on. But God has shown me that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean. Walls down. Walls gone. Walls blown up and disintegrated. Anything that would ever keep anybody that's different from somebody else from coming to the gospel reality of Jesus Christ and his grace is destroyed. Peter looks at this Gentile man and he says, hey, normally I wouldn't even be able to talk to you, but I've had a vision that says that everything I thought was wrong. So I came without objection as soon as I was sent for. Now tell me why you sent for me. So Peter comes, he doesn't even know why this guy wants him. And then Cornelius goes on to tell him, I had a vision that said, come get you, so I came and got you. What do you have for me? Well, what's the message that you have for me? Well, what is this message you have? So we jump over to verse 39. It says this, and we apostles are witnesses of all he did throughout Judea and Jerusalem. He's talking about Jesus. They put him to death by hanging him on a cross. He's just telling the gospel story of Jesus now to this Gentile, to this outsider. They put him to death by hanging him on a cross. But God raised him to life on the third day. Then God allowed him to appear, not to the general public, but to us, whom God had chosen in advance to be his witnesses. We were those who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. And he ordered us to preach everywhere and to testify that Jesus is the one appointed by God to be the judge of all, the living and the dead. He is the one all the prophets testified about. Saying that everyone. We were ordered to preach. We were ordered to tell the gospel. We were ordered to share the life of Jesus so that everyone who believes in him will have their sins forgiven. This had never happened. The Jews thought this was all for them. And rightfully so. I understand why they believed that. But when Jesus came, he said, but there's more. This message I have, the love I will share, the grace I will give, the forgiveness I will offer, is for everyone. Even you, Roman. Even you, Gentile. Even you, person who is the opposite of who I am. In this moment, God proves that there is not one type of person he does not love. That there is not one type of person, one race of people, one ethnicity, one shade of skin color that he cares for less than another. Not one. Here's the wild part to all this. Like, we can ask the question again, like, what if God were racist? Then you and me wouldn't be saved. Because if God picked one race, it wouldn't be ours. If God were racist, you and I wouldn't get to share in the blessedness of this reality of worshiping God for forgiveness and grace and love. We are the Roman. We're the Gentile. We were the ones excluded. We were the ones that didn't have access to the grace. We were the ones that didn't have access to the cross. We were the ones that didn't have access to the reality of Jesus Christ. And yet in this moment in Acts chapter 10, God says, well, I want you. And we come here today to celebrate that reality that God loves us all. So I ask you the question again, are you racist? Man, it's a strong, nasty question. It's offensive. Are there types of people, groups of people, colors of people, locations of people, borders where people come from, whatever, that you look down upon and would be unwilling to share Jesus with? And what would happen if God acted that way? We may have had really bad experiences with different types of people different than us. We may have really true stories that are like really rough and have caused us to think differently about other people. You may have. I understand. I'm not saying they're not real. I believe that. But that does not give us permission to not love people the way that Jesus loved them by dying for them on the cross. That does not give us permission to neglect the reality that gospel must be shared with them. We must live and love like Jesus did and like Jesus does. We can't let a difference keep us from doing our job of sharing gospel. I end with a story. And I've told some people this story. So I think it was just this last Christmas. Maybe been 2 Christmases ago. my family came down and we were opening gifts from them, and we had told my family that Eve wants a baby doll just like her sister Sophia. Her sister Sophia had this little baby. It was an infant baby, very small, tiny, very realistic looking, kind of creepy. And it was a little baby boy. Supposedly had a blue hat on anyway. And so we had told my mother that Eve wants a baby doll just like that. We told my mom what brand it was and where we got it, all that kind of stuff. And so my mom she ordered it, wrapped it, brings it, and gives it to Eve, and she begins to open it. And my mom, like this whole time, kind of has her head down. She's kind of got this look on her face. I'm like, what's going on? And so Eve opens it, and inside this box is a little baby that is black. This little baby doll is a black baby doll. And I remember Eve, she opened that, and I looked at my mom, I'm like, it was no problem, right? But I'm just like, that's different. She's like, that's the one that came. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's no big deal. There's a little baby girl. She was black. And I remember Eve was looking at this little baby, and she was just kind of looking, and then she looked at Soph's, and she looked back at hers, and then she looked at Soph's, and she looked back at hers, and she goes, this one's different. I said, yeah, honey, why is it different? And she goes, well, this one's a girl. How do we screw up our kids so bad? They are colorblind. This baby doll is black as night. And yet she noticed it was a girl instead of a boy. Our behavior towards other groups of people, other colors of people, other shades of skin, other ethnicities, other cultures, that is learned. Because it is not how God made us. Red, yellow, black, and white. They are precious in His sight. And if we don't live that way, we are not living the way that Jesus lived. While this sermon seems like it's about race, it's not. It's about the universality of the reality that Jesus wants everybody to believe in Him and make Him Lord of their life. Are we living that